Hello BookTube, this is Weekly Reads. This reading week will cover what I read this past weekend, the 30th and 31st of March, as well as looking ahead to what I will be reading next Thursday and Friday. Since April 1st, I have been reading Magi: The Labyrinth of Magic by Shinobu Otaka. Tonight I will be reading volumes 13, 14, and 15, and I will be talking about the first 15 volumes later this evening, as well as hopefully a book haul. So this video is just not going to be about manga. I'm going to do a separate one for that. So I might be able to talk a bit more about other things as well in this video, if things go according to plan. So before I talk about what I read on Saturday and Sunday, I have to talk about desire. Over the past few months, I have felt an increasing desire to add more poetry and 20th century American drama to my collection. I have succeeded in the poetry, not so much in the drama, and I'm also feeling an urge to add more contemporary translated fiction, as well as canonical and proto-canonical American fiction. However, that desire, while I think the momentum was picking up last week, but that momentum hit a wall on Saturday, and I talked a few times about that over the course of this past week. And that wall was made of stone. The Stone Diaries by Carol Shields. So my plan for this past reading weekend was to read The Stone Diaries by Carol Shields. This is a fictional autobiography of a woman named Daisy Flett. She was born in 1905 in Manitoba, Canada, and died sometime in the 1990s in, I think, Florida. I barely got 20 pages in before I decided to bail. The first scene of the book is about Daisy's mother, Mercy, who is finishing up supper. She's made a pudding and is trying to figure out how to chill it so it will set, when Mercy begins to feel a discomfort. Her water has broken and she is going into labor, although Mercy does not know this, because Mercy does not know she is pregnant. Meanwhile, Mercy's next door neighbor, Mrs. Flood, is hanging out the laundry and reflecting on her dissatisfied life. Mrs. Flood is trying to figure out what she wants to do when she hits upon going over and asking Mercy if she would like to come over for some tea. Just as Mrs. Flood is about to go over, she is accosted by a traveling salesman who is called the Old Jew, and is described in the most, or pretty much every anti-Semitic descriptor you can imagine. Before eventually Mrs. Flood figures out what the salesman is trying to say. And it's at that point that I checked out of the book. I put the book down. I took some time. I tried to come back. I thought maybe, okay, skim the first chapter, start on the second, and it was no go. The writing is beautiful, but I did not find a plot or characters that really interested me. And that just, one realization I had about, in a way, well, two things. One, as nice as beautiful writing can be, it's not what I'm most interested in a story. I am far more interested in plot and character. And with character, maybe not necessarily the kind of characterization that usually happens in more literary fiction or more general fiction or whatever the hell you want to call it. And secondly, I really wasn't feeling the book and that description, that scene, just was a quick, okay, I don't want to read this book. So I bailed and I'm done with it. And I really feel no interest to actually revisit it. Whether or not it actually improves, whether or not there's a better handling of it later on, it just, no. So I took some time and I decided to read some poetry. So on Saturday, I read 2 collections. First up, Metabolics by Jessica E. Johnson, which is a collection that I have been meaning to read for several weeks now. It's a collection that's made up of several long poems that are kind of broken into sort of individual poems. And I must admit some trepidation going into this collection because some of the poems or constituent parts of the poems are prose poems. And I'm not the biggest fan of prose poems. But as I got into the collection, I really enjoyed it. I thought this was a really fun collection. And then I reread The View from Saturn by Alice Friman. I read this late last year and really enjoyed it. And having another read of it, I equally enjoyed it. I thought the first few poems I didn't quite get on with, but that I think what happened the first time I read it as well. This collection I think takes some time to get into, but there are some really fantastic poems. Particularly, I am really wanting to do the poem Joker for Poetry Thursday at some point. And then on Sunday, I read 2 collections before going over to my brother's for Easter. I started with Beachlight by Cyril Wong. So this is a poem that's like, it's a long poem that's sort of broken up into 60 smaller poems. And it's about a closeted gay Singaporean who is just traveling around the beach and pretty much ruminating on his life and the lives of others. And while I liked some of the individual constituent poems, I'm not entirely sure about the overall poem as a whole. Although I will come back to this at some point because it's not very long. And I reread Within the Sweet Noise of Life by Sandro Penna, translated by Alexander Booth. So this is a short selected edition of Sandro Penna's work, and the poems are quite delightful, although some of them are quite short. So that leads me to what I will be reading next week, or next Thursday, Friday. So my initial thought was to, once I finish Magi the Labyrinth of Magic, to read some poetry, because April is National Poetry Month. So my first thought was to read some German poems. So I thought maybe, okay, Etudes by Friederike Mayrocker, translated by Donna Stonecipher, and Porcelain by Durs Grunbein, translated by Karen Leeder. Now, Porcelain, I think I could do in a day. It's not quite 100 pages. It's a little less than 100 pages. But Etudes is longer, and most of the poems I think that I've kind of looked at are more prose poems. So this would be more of a 2-day read or like a weekend read than like an individual reading day during the work week. So I'm like, maybe not. Now, the reason why I gravitated toward these two is that the University of Chicago Press, to celebrate National Poetry Month, is having a sale on selected poetry collections. And newer work by both Mayrocker and Grunbein are included. And so I'm kind of thinking maybe to add them to my collection as well as several other collections. So I wanted to read these two before I decide to buy more from them to make sure I like them. So another option, and to stick with poetry, is to spend Thursday and Friday with the Dickman brothers, Michael and Matthew. So I would read All American Poem by Matthew Dickman and The End of the West by Michael Dickman. I could also, instead of reading some poetry, read a novel. She by H. Rider Haggard. So one of the BookTube events this month is Spring into Adventure. And the group read for Spring into Adventure is She by H. Rider Haggard. She is a novel from the late 19th century. It's part of the Lost World genre of romance. I'm not I mean, it would be early fantasy. I mean, we would now consider it fantasy. At the time, it would be like a romance. Although, I mean, romance has obviously transitioned into more of a love story than an adventure story. But I don't know. I read She when I was 14. I bought an omnibus of She, King Solomon's Mines, and Alan Quatermain, and read She, and I don't remember it fondly. But that's been over 20 years. Well, about 25 years now. So maybe give it a reread, but I've also found that Haggard's work hasn't quite aged for me. Well, that's not the right word. I found that with the passage of time, I'm not as fond of Haggard's work as I was when I was a teen. I have tried several times to reread King Solomon's Mines, and I have not necessarily enjoyed the experience. So I don't know. So I need to think about it. I mean, I have the better part of a week to decide how things are going to go with that. Anyway, so since I have a little bit more time, I do want to address my absence on Wednesday and Thursday. So often I try to make at least one video every day during the work week and take the weekends off. And lately I have been doing some Saturday book hauls because usually if I order something from Pals or Book People, I'll get those books on Saturday. And so, yeah. So normally if I don't make a video during the work week, it's because I actually tried to make a video and it just did not work. So on Wednesday, I wanted to make a book or a video discussing the recent spate of videos kind of discussing the Great American Novel. because a few weeks ago, The Atlantic released a list of 136 candidates for the Great American Novel. And a number of booktubers reacted and made their own lists. And I wanted to participate. And as I was kind of making my own list, I came to the realization that I'm not as deeply read in American literature, particularly canonical and would-be canonical American literature, as I'm comfortable being to make this list. So maybe what I could do is make a reading project of it, assemble a list of 10 to 25 works of American fiction that could be candidates for the Great American Novel. Maybe some of them would be rereads, because I haven't read many of these in like almost 20 years. So, and just see how that goes. Now, that was part of the sort of building momentum from last week. And obviously with the Stone Diaries being as what it was, kind of changed the dynamic, like changed how I was going to approach it, how I was thinking about it, as it did my video on the long list for the Booker International. Had I made that video on Friday, it would have been very different than it was on Monday. And so now I'm not entirely sure if I want to do that project, because, I mean, when I try these projects, as much fun as collecting the books is, the actual reading of them does not necessarily turn out all that well. So that is something that I need to be aware that I'm aware of, and I need to resist. Even if some of them work, it's just, yeah. So that's one thing that I wanted to make a video about, and it just didn't quite work. Largely, I think because I spent way too much time commenting on everybody else's videos, and that's not necessarily what I wanted to talk about. And then on Thursday, there was a book tag I wanted to do. And the kind of book tag, it's a self-reflective book tag on the nature, on being a booktuber. And those tags I tend not to really enjoy doing them, because there's a certain level of intention that, those tags tend to assume a certain intentionality to making booktube videos that I don't quite know how to handle. But what I might do this coming Tuesday is have another go at that tag, as well as another one that's somewhat similar that I saw maybe about a week or two ago, and try to combine the two and do that kind of like a double tag Tuesday or something, and hope it works out. I don't know, hopefully. Anyway, so that's about all I have for now. Hopefully, so there will certainly be a video later this evening discussing the first 15 volumes of Magi, the Labyrinth of Magic. On Monday, I will then talk about the volumes 16 through 27. And then on either Wednesday evening or Thursday afternoon, I will talk about volumes 28 through 37. I think that will work. Rather than just doing one long video, I think I'll do 3. And then if this works out, then that's how I'll approach when I do these big manga reading projects in the future, rather than kind of bundling them into weekly reads. Because I do like to talk about manga, and I can go on. So, anyway, book, and then of course, hopefully, oh, I'll be right back because there's a book call coming.